At Charity Charge, our mission is to power yours. Most banks and financial service providers weren't built for nonprofits. They don't understand your structure or how you operate. That's why we exist. We proudly serve more than 3,000 organizations across the U.S., offering tools built exclusively for the sector. From credit cards and expense management to bookkeeping and gift cards, every solution is designed to help you minimize operations and supercharge your impact. And we're more than just financial services. We're an educational community. We share resources every day on our podcast, blog, and webinars to help you stay informed, compliant, and empowered. Visit charitycharge.com to learn more and join the community.
Welcome to this episode of the Charity Charge Show. Happy New Year. Happy 2026. I'm your host, Stephen Garton. I am so excited to have our guest today, Rob Scheer, who is the founder of Comfort Cases. Rob, thank you so much for being with us today.
Stephen, thank you so much for having me and Happy New Year.
Likewise. Well, as I was doing research and I was learning more about your story and Comfort Cases, there were a lot of statistics and numbers that came out that really exposed to me all the important work of why you're doing it and then the good that you've created. But I'd love in your own words to just introduce yourself and
Sure.
talk about, your reason for starting Comfort Cases.
You better believe it. The thing is that I look back and I realize that my entire life, the only thing I truly wanted is to be wanted. When you're a kid growing up in the foster care system, a system that we actually built and created, I think people don't realize how lonely it is. Even though you have social workers, you have CASAs, you have guardian ad litems, you have foster parents, you have judges, it's still very lonely, very scary. And for me, I know that firsthand because I was a kid that grew up in the system in the DMV. The statistics show that we have one child every 2 minutes who enters foster care, 700 a day in the United States. We also know that children enter foster care because of choices that other people made, not because of a choice they made. It's a choice that other people made. And for me, I knew what that was like to have parents who should have never been parents. There's one thing when you look at kids, Stephen, that are neglected. Okay, that word neglect is a broad. The court systems have determined that neglect can be something like can't afford to pay electricity. Well, that's not your fault that we're not paying you a living wage. So now you can't afford to pay electricity. So now that your electric's turned off, I'm going to take your kids. Oh, by the way, you left your 5-year-old with your 12-year-old because you cannot afford daycare, but you're working two jobs just to keep food on the table for your two children. But I'm going to take your kids because you left your 5-year-old with your 12-year-old because you're neglectful. That's where we have to change the system. The problem is I came into the system because of abuse. We see roughly about 37% of children enter foster care because of the word of abuse. I'm 59 years old, and every day I'm reminded of the hell I went through as a young boy because of the scars from the cigarettes that my father put out on me. See, that was my family. That was what I was delivered to. And then to be the youngest of 10 kids and to be delivered to a system that was supposed to take care of me, a system that was supposed to make my future brighter than what it was by the situation you took me out of. But instead, I came into a system and I was no more than a file or a number until the fall of 1984 when I actually turned 18 years old. See, the fact is out of all my brothers and sisters, nobody had ever graduated high school. My parents had never graduated high school. My grandparents probably never graduated high school. And I know that my brothers and sisters had not graduated from high school because they had already been doing exactly what kids happens to kids when we stick the F word in front of them. And I'm not talking the dirty word. I'm talking foster care, drug addiction, incarceration, teenage pregnancy, gangs, all of the things that we see kids in foster care gravitating toward. And for me, I didn't do that. I gravitated towards an education. And that fall day in 1984, my whole world was shocked again. It was shocked enough that I came into the system, but I actually managed through it. I actually called my foster parents, mom and dad. Life was not great, but you know what? At least I had a roof over my head until that day. And I aged out. See, the thing is that we see roughly 22,000 children in the United States will age out just like I did. And the saddest part is 70% of those kids, they become homeless within 24 hours, just like me.
When you talk about the statistics, it's really remarkable. So I want to just hone in on those just for a second. And this is information that I pulled off, doing some research on your website. So correct me if I'm wrong or any of
Sure.
these numbers should be changed. 400,000 kids in foster care. as you mentioned, 23,000 kids age out of foster care every year. 25% of foster youth who age out become homeless.
Because of the new homeless count that we just did, as you know, we have the count of the night. Have you heard of that? Where all over the country, people volunteer to go and they count the people who are experiencing homelessness for us to get an accurate count on the number of people who are experiencing homeless in our country. They have just did that count and realized that the percentage of those people that are experiencing homeless, over 82% of those people were either touched or in foster care. So
So it's
we're
a
seeing a higher number.
it's a much higher number. And then as you talk about it, former foster youth are 7 times more likely to experience drug dependence, 2 times more likely to suffer from PTSD than combat veterans.
Yes.
That of all of these and they're numbers, right? So we're gonna talk about direct impact and people, and we're talking about your story. That statistic came out at me. I couldn't believe it because I was just as we read, it was 2 times more likely, and I'm thinking, well, 2 times doesn't seem. And then when I it was in reference to combat veterans, I just couldn't believe it. And as you pointed out, only 3% graduate from college.
Now, I have to tell you that we are very thankful to see that that number has changed for the first time that I have seen that number change in 12 years. We are now up to about 8% of kids in foster care getting a 4-year degree.
Awesome. I
That is
appreciate you
still
sharing that.
it's still disgusting, and let me
Right.
tell you, I was in a state in 2025, and I was giving a talk, and it just so happens that there were a lot of, politicians that were there to hear me speak, and I was speaking about child welfare, about, like I do in every single state I go to, and the fact of making people understand that foster care doesn't belong to you, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to us. And I was explaining about how, we needed to build our future stronger by investing in our children in foster care. And I remember a particular politician got up and spoke after me and was praising about how their child welfare in their state went from um, 15% of kids living in hotels and offices to 13% of kids living in offices and hotels. And they're seeing that number come down. And I will have to tell you, my friend, immediately my PTSD came out because I was thinking to myself, how could this even, why are we celebrating only a 2% drop? No child, no young adult, no one should be sleeping in an office, and no child should be sleeping in a hotel by themselves. We know the outcome of that. In the state of Maryland, we just had in the fall of 2025 a beautiful 16-year-old human who lost her life as she sat in a hotel in Baltimore City in foster care. In a hotel at 16, the system is gone.
Thank you for holding me accountable, and that's what I appreciate about you and also being able to do this podcast. Because my remark was, "Hey, that's great." The number dropped from 25 to 22 or to whatever we were originally talking about, and you talk about the 15 to 13 and people are cheering, and we shouldn't be thinking about it that way, and I appreciate your passion and your mission. What I'd like to ask you and kinda go into now is,
Sure.
as I understand your story, you had this experience up, through your childhood, up through age 18, and then
Yeah,
something changed for you in your life, right? You went into the
yeah.
military.
I went in
Talk
the
about.
Navy.
Yep.
And the thing is that I remind kids in foster care who have aged out or who are in the path of aging out, I want you to listen to my story because my story is not different than most people. Everybody thinks that, oh, here, look at Rob Scheer, the public figure now and the public speaker and author, and he's been on these HBO shows. Let me tell you something. Up until the age of 24, I dealt with the most unbelievable drug addiction. I've had 4 suicide attempts. I have laid in most every psychiatric hospital in the DMV. And it was at the age of 24 on my last attempted drug overdose that I woke up in a hospital. And I realized at that moment that my life had to go somewhere different because it wasn't going the way I wanted it to, which, by the way, the way I wanted it to go was I didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't want to be here. I was alone. I was 24. I felt like everything had caved in on me. And instead, what I did is I woke up and I forgave immediately. I forgave my mom and dad. I forgave them for the abuse they put me through. I forgave them for leaving me and dying. I forgave my foster parents for giving up on an 18-year-old boy who just wanted someone to want him. I forgave my community who saw the boy who was homeless his entire senior year of high school, and nobody handed me a piece of bread, and I forgave them. But then I reminded myself that that forgiveness was to do nothing for them. That forgiveness was to bring the power back within my reach so then I could go on with my future. And I will tell you, my friend, from that day that I walked out of that hospital in Northern Virginia, I never once have taken another drug. I do not drink any longer. Have taken accountability for my own actions and realized that the system that was trying to break me and also create me no longer had power of me. And I no longer blamed the system because I was in it for the fight to change the system.
It's pretty incredible. I really appreciate you sharing all of that. What I want to get into now, which will really help illustrate the incredible story and what you've been able to create, is I've been running Charity Charge for over 10 years now. We've interacted with, quite frankly, I wanted to say tens of thousands. Maybe it's not that big, but it could be up there of different nonprofit leaders, right? And it's all relative. Like doing well, giving back, making change, it can happen. You can help just one person. But sometimes, like in maybe a company like Apple, for example, wow, that scales. It's global. There's huge impact, right? What you've been able to do with comfort cases has that scale. You've really taken a personal experience and realized, like, I believe as you were going through it, it was the experience of one, right? Then, when you adopted your first two children, you saw something in that experience in them that helped give you this insight and I guess that extra drive to create comfort cases. So, talk to us about that, please.
The crazy thing is I was a banker by trade. I had been a banker for 28 years. I had climbed that corporate ladder. I'd become an executive. I owned mortgage companies with my business partners all over the country. Life was good. My husband and I did not want. We lived a amazing life in the city, cocktail parties, invited to the mayor's house for dinner, and then our babies arrived. And when my daughter Amaya and our son Makai arrived, it was a total shock for me. Because first of all, you have to understand something. My husband, who is the rock of our entire family and our organization, my husband came from a different planet, sometimes I think, a different palette than I came from. He grew up in the Midwest. His parents had been married for 50 some years. He grew up in, going to religious colleges, and family was the unit. And I grew up in the system. No bond, no connection, no family. And all of a sudden, these babies arrive in our home. And the first thing I see is a trash bag, trash bag. And it was just the flood of emotions for me, of remembering what that felt like when I had it, remembering what it felt like when I aged out and I had it, remembering how that trash bag tried to define me. It made me invisible, disposable, as if I didn't matter to anyone. And I looked at this little girl and this little boy, and I thought, how dare we? How dare we start out their path, these two innocent humans, and we say to them, here's a trash bag because that's about all you're worth. We all know trash bags were invented for trash, not children's clothing. But I just thought maybe this was a misguided happen. It just happened. And I asked the social worker, I said, are you kidding me? I said, you're telling me after all of these years I've been out of the system that you guys are still using the trash bag? And I remember that social worker standing in my home in Northeast DC. She looked at my husband, Reese, and I, and she said, well, what else should we use? Wow. At that moment, the words came out of my mouth, and I said, what about some dignity? Dignity. And that's what stuck with me.
And talk to us now as you share that. What was it like getting up and running the first year? And then if we fast forward, what kind of impact have you made? Because the numbers are just incredible, right?
They're crazy. They're crazy.
That you had this. And I want there's a lot more we can get into if we have time and all, but I really want to make sure we get out, what was the first year like,
Yeah.
okay, in terms
Yeah.
of what you did, the impact you made, and then talk
Like,
about
what was
now.
every day like? It was like so first of all, you gotta realize, so, first 2 kids arrived, trash bags still going on in my mind. 3 months later, our 2 more kids arrived, so don't even tell people that we're not crazy because we had 4 kids within 3 months under the age of 4, all 4 in diapers. And my 2 boys, they arrived with trash bags. And at that time, as the kids were growing and, we adopted them and, they're going to private schools where they've got passports, they're traveling. And I realized I was sitting in my office in Rockville, Maryland, and my husband walked in and he had given up his career as an interior designer. He'd just gotten his master's before the children arrived, but he had given up his career to be a stay-at-home dad. He felt that that was the most important job that he could ever have in his life was raising our children. And I give him all the props in the world because it's a hard job. It's a hard job being a parent. It's even a harder job to be a parent of four, but it's even a harder job to be a parent of four trying to navigate a system that's pushing against you. And I remember that day as my husband walked in for us to plan a toy drive for all the needy kids that we used to give in the DC area. And I remember saying to Reese, I said, I don't want to do it. And he said, "What do you mean?" He said, "The kids will have to go out and shop." I said, "Liz, what are we teaching our kids?" I said, I said, "I think we're failing them." And he said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Kids are amazing." I was like, "No." I was like, "You know," I said, "We forgot to teach them what their legacy is. Your legacy is about what you give to society, not what you take." And then we forgot to teach them empathy. See, the thing is that empathy is not in our DNA. Empathy is taught, and we should not require teachers to teach it. It should be taught at home. And I remember him saying, "What do you wanna do?" And I opened up my desk drawer and I pulled out a trash bag. See, the fact is I don't allow one to be far away from me. I don't wanna forget where I came from, and I don't want my children to be embarrassed about where they came from. And I said, "I'm gonna eliminate these in foster care in DC." And Bree said to me, "You are bat-ass crazy." I said, "I know, that's why you married me." I said, "We can do this." So we gathered members of our church, some local politicians, my senior staff, and I shared the story that I shared with your listeners, the fact of a 12-year-old little boy who had no hope, a boy who turned 18 and no one even bothered to clap for him when he walked across the stage with that diploma, a boy at the age of 24 who realized that the world had given up on him because he had given up on himself. But he also knew that he had to have a purpose. And that purpose was to take that trash bag and throw it in the trash where it belonged and give a child a comfort case, a backpack that's filled with the essential items that a child needs on that very first night, a brand new pair of pajamas with a tag on it. I want every child to get their own lotion, their own shampoo, their own conditioner, and their own bar of soap. See, you must understand. Children walk into a house of strangers. We expect them to assimilate immediately. And you and I both know we would not go into a hotel and use a used bar of soap from the people that were in that hotel room before you. You don't know them. It's called dignity. That's what kids in foster care deserve. And then I want every kid to get a toothbrush and toothpaste because I don't care what you say. My teeth are beautiful. My teeth cost me an arm and a leg because nobody bothered to do something as teaching me proper dental hygiene when I was a little boy. And so I want every kid to get activity because we know that over 90% of kids who enter foster care enter in the back of a police cruiser. They go to a holding center. We call them rainbow rooms, light bright, whatever you want to call them. They're no more than a holding cell. They go into these rooms with broken crayons. They got used coloring books. They got books that are all ripped up. No, 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 no. I want them to have their own activity, brand new coloring book. I want kids over the age of 12 to have their own journal and pen and pencil set. I want every kid to get a stuffed animal because I don't care whether you are a newborn or you're 59, we all love a good stuffed animal. And then finally, my son Grayson. Wow. He was 5 years old when we packed our very first backpack. He's now 18. He said, "Daddy," he said, "we have to put a blankie in every single case." And I said, "Grayson," I said, "a blankie?" I said, "Grayson, none of these kids are going to be cold." And he said, "I know, Daddy, but every time they wrap themselves up in their blankie, they know we love them." Wow. My friend, that's what we all want. We want to be loved. We want to know we matter. We're not disposable. And with that, we packed a case and another and another. And because of amazing people like you, amazing people that are listening to this podcast, we have packed and delivered over 300,000 backpacks in the last 13 years. We have delivered them to all 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico. And I know I don't need to remind your smart viewers, Puerto Rico belongs to us. Yes, it's surrounded by water, but so is Hawaii. See, the thing is that we must understand that our forefathers actually built communities for one reason, and it was not for our bushes to match. It was for us to take care of each other. But we also must walk away with understanding that our community, it's not our zip code. Our community is our human race. So what affects people in my little town of Darnestown, Maryland, affects people in Austin, Texas, which affects people in San Francisco. We must take care of each other before we can take care of anyone else.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. The entire story that you have is incredible. And the impact, the 300,000 cases that you've delivered is unreal.
And by the way, we've done that with no we've done that with no federal money. We've had no state funding. Do not have any large corporations that are funding us. We are roughly almost a $6 million nonprofit that has been built on the average donor of $8.
Glad you said that because I wanted to highlight something that is both for listeners to be able to support your efforts and quite frankly is just smart. I mean, it moved me, right? $25 donation buys 2 kids brand new pajamas. A $50 donation purchases toiletry sets for 10 children. A $100 donation puts dental kits in the hands of 33 kids. If you
33
make
kids, can you imagine?
yeah,
And
$200
by
donation.
the way, you and I both know that most of us spend that in 1 month at that overpriced coffee shop, and by the way, I don't say their name because they do not donate to us, but we know that we spend that money on things that we don't need. How about spending it on something that a child does need? And by the way, they deserve it too.
Rob, if you have time, can you walk us through? I mean, people listening to this, like you talk about the system, right? You reference it, at which I'll hear that in different contexts, different conversations, or watching the news, whatever it might be. If you had a magic wand, right? What would you change? Is it like what I think, not knowing the answer? Like I live in Austin, right? For example, and we have a growing homeless population, and we also I could get into my side of like what I would do differently there. But what are the underlying things that need to change?
First of all, the
How do
very
we
first thing.
stop this period? Like, there I always think about it's, the old, I don't know, not fable, whatever, story, etcetera, whatever it is of s someone's all these people are drowning at the bottom of a river, and some guy keeps going in, and then he keeps going in, he keeps and then a woman walks upstream, and she sees where they're falling in, and she stops them from falling in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will tell you, I know what your question is. And, first of all, we must all understand as a collective whole that when a child comes into foster care, we as society have already failed. Sorry, we've already failed. See, the problem is that we've come into a cycle within our country, and I think it's also within the world because, by the way, we are international now. We serve 84,000 children in the UK, and this year we will be opening up a center in Canada where we will serve a little over 60,000 children in Canada. But the thing is that if once a child enters the system, we've already failed. And what we need to do is go through what the cycle we're going through now is that we have forgotten how to support our neighbor. We have forgotten how what is our neighbor's love supposed to look like? And by the way, it is not what we are seeing, And when I see my neighbor's lights not on for 5 days, but I see their kids are all running around, I should go over and ask, is everything okay? When I see the kids out at late at night riding their bicycle up and down the street, when at their age they should be in bed or taking a shower or working on homework, I am not going to close my door and act like there's nothing out there. I'm going to see if my neighbor needs assistance. See, there's things that we must do to protect each other, but also to help each other. So that is the first thing we have to understand. But if I had a magic wand and I could change something once a child enters the system, there's two things I would do immediately. First thing, set the child up, the young adult up for financial success. How do you do that? First of all, you're able to stroke a check every single month to a total stranger to watch this kid. Okay. Most states, you're averaging about $1,000 per kid. I know that in my state of Maryland, DC, the money can go higher and higher. Okay. Why can't we take a portion of that money and put it in an interest bearing savings account for that young adult or that young child? So when they do age out, okay, which by the way, they will, one day they will age out. When they do age out, we have set them up for success. Down payment for for an apartment, down payment for a car. That is what we need to do. Second, we need to open up the education pathways for all children who enter foster care. And I do not mean you state governors who are hearing this. Don't write your bill saying you're going to pay for their tuition if they go to the college. Children in foster care deserve the same thing that my children get. And let me explain what my children get. My children graduated from high school. I have four actually that have already graduated. So I have one. My baby's still in high school. When they graduated from high school, they had a choice. They had a choice to apply to colleges all over the country. They had a choice to do a trade school, and they had the understanding that when they made these choices, that their parents were going to take care of it. Okay. That my children are not walking out of a school in debt. Okay. Like we have done so many times to so many other people, and they continue to fail them. What we do is we open up the education pathways that not only does this kid who's in the state of Maryland, which by the way, I love Governor Moore, they have the same program where if a child in foster care in the state of Maryland goes to a school in the state of Maryland, Maryland covers it. But guess what? I want Judy to be able to apply to Harvard because she worked so hard for that. And I want her to be able to understand that we will take care of that because she worked so hard in a system that pushed her and pushed her and pushed her, but she kept pushing back. And now Harvard accepted her, but she lives in Virginia. And Virginia will only pay for schools in Virginia. That's got to stop. But we also have to make sure that when we do pay for tuition, that we also provide wrap around services. These kids need mental health. By the way, love Dr. Rich, my therapist for many, many years. Every Monday, he is set on my calendar no matter where I am in the world. I zoom in with my therapist. We need people to understand that therapy doesn't make you weak. Therapy builds your foundation stronger. We need to open up that for kids as well.
Wow. And what about as you're growing, can you just give us this, like the big, whether you think about your 3-year vision, 5-year vision, also for right now, you talked about expanding to Canada, talked
Yeah.
about your work in the UK. Where is this thing going? I'm sure you're pressed for time right now, and that's
I
maybe
got
why
time for you. I got
why
time
you're
for you.
because what I'm getting at, and I kind of can ramble a little bit right now, but Rob, the you had mentioned, and I'll recap any of this, right, as I'm throwing out multiple questions at the same time. What's remarkable, there's the impact side, obviously, the mission, clearly, okay, your story. You mentioned how you don't have any grant money for your
No, I didn't say
organization.
grant money. I said federal money
Federal
or
money.
state money. We do grants. Thank you,
Okay,
grant companies, but we don't take
great.
federal.
My
We haven't made federal dollars yet. Yet. I'm not
my
saying I wouldn't. People ask me all the time, Rob, why don't take federal money? Because guess what? I'm not jumping through all those hoops. I'm trying to solve a problem. I'm not sitting here trying to pick somebody's politics. That's not me. I'm not that guy.
But you figured out, I get it. So here's the question, Rob. Approximately 95% of all nonprofit organizations are under $1 million in revenue, and 97% are under 2 million, directionally somewhere there. You're at over 6 million. What you all have been able to do. So what has been sort of the secret, or what's allowed your organization to scale?
I truly think that it's given the platform for people to understand that we are normalizing foster care as much as possible. My friend Jennifer Perry, she's the founder of Foster More. And several years ago, they did a marketing campaign called something like Talking About the Water Cooler, but it was trying to make foster care more talked about. Well, that's what Comfort Case is like. We've been normalizing it. So we've been fortunate that, we've grown our platform on social media. I remind every single person. And by the way, I come from the .com world. We're takers. Being in the .org world where you're givers, it's totally different. But what I've learned being in this .org world is that it's just as cutthroat as being a banker, and that's the sad because I have my podcast called Fostering Change. I'm in my 7th season, my 3rd year being number 1 as a foster care and adoption podcast. But the whole reason I started this podcast was to elevate other nonprofits. That was the reason. People came to me and like, what are you doing? I remember my agent, I'm like, listen, If we would get nonprofits to work together, do you realize how tall our tree could grow? Because if you pick that low hanging fruit, your tree grows taller. And that's what I try to do is to bring people together. There's enough money to go around. Not everybody has to have a comfort case site. Work together. And then we can create and correct the problem that we have seen continuously.
Totally aligned with you there. That's the purpose of this podcast and really ultimately what I'm trying to do here at Charity Charge. And we need to get out of from the nonprofit leaders the scarcity mindset and figure out ways but that's also I mean that's the system, right? That's the nonprofit industrial complex and it's challenging, but I really am totally mission aligned with you. So I really appreciate what you're doing there. And I'm so glad kind of I guess here if we round it out, it's a good ending note to just kind of bring it back full circle because I really appreciate you being on this episode of the Charity Charge Show.
Any opportunity that I have to talk about foster care and about how we can all be better humans, I've said this all over the world is, first of all, we have to stop lying to our young people. We say to young people all the time, oh, invest in a child, you invest in their future. That's such BS. It's a lie. It's a lie that's been told by the elders generation after generation. Actually, when you invest in a child, you actually invest in my future, in your future, because they are our leaders of tomorrow. So why do we continuously not understanding that this is a win-win for us to invest in these young minds, to be able to mold them to be the future that we know they can be? We need to invest. And not just allow them to be a statistic and fill our penitentiaries. That's where we cannot allow this to go further.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and really educating me and our listeners because I was more like your husband, how I was raised and how I was fortunate with everything that was given to me. So when I hear your story and when I learn about these numbers and these statistics, it's eye opening for me. And it's just stuff that I wouldn't normally know or learn on my own. So I really appreciate you coming on. I'm glad for everyone that's listened to this episode. And I look forward to collaborating with you. I really want to see how we can help you out. And obviously, you already made it easy when you broke down, which is really smart, how $25 or $50 or $100 can go a really far way. So, Rob, thank you again for being here. For anyone listening, also, you can check out Rob and Comfort Cases website simply at comfortcases.org. Rob, is there anything else you want to say in closing here?
You know what? The thing I always tell everybody, every morning when you wake up, you should do three things through your day. Number one, smile at somebody that you don't even know, because I will explain to you that smile that you give that person could be the only smile they receive that day. And it could be the smile that they needed to get them over something as difficult as possible. Second thing that you can do is hold a door for someone. You don't have to know them. Hold the door. Say, here, hold the door. But I always say to my kids, and I've said this since they were little, when you're sitting in that cafeteria or you're at that library or you're in that food court and you see somebody sitting alone and they seem pretty sad, go sit with them, talk with them, say hi. Okay? Because that's how we make connections. And connections is how we are going to make tomorrow better than it is today. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you, Rob.